The sun blazed over the palm-lined streets of Beverly Hills as Marcus Ferrari pulled into the valet zone of the Grandeur Hotel. At 42, Marcus had everything money could buy: a tech empire worth $300 million, a penthouse overlooking the Pacific, and an ego that matched his bank account. But what he didn't have was what the old man standing near his car possessed: in abundance, dignity, wisdom, and a past that would soon collide with Marcus's present in the most unexpected way. What Marcus didn't know as he stepped out of that Ferrari was that the elderly black man admiring his vehicle wasn't just anyone. He was Samuel Hayes, 78 years old, a decorated Korean War veteran, and the man whose invention 40 years ago had laid the groundwork for the very technology that made Marcus his fortune. But life has a way of humbling the proud, and this afternoon would teach Marcus Wellington a lesson worth more than all his millions. This is the story of one slap, one moment of cruelty, and the incredible truth that changed everything. Marcus emerged from his Ferrari wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His designer sunglasses reflected the California sun as he tossed his keys to the valet with barely a glance. He was late for a business lunch, his mind already calculating the millions he'd make from his latest app acquisition. That's when he noticed Samuel. The old man stood a few feet away, his weathered hand resting gently on the Ferrari's hood. Samuel's eyes held a distant look, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He wore simple clothes, a button-down shirt tucked into worn khakis, shoes that had seen better days. His silver hair caught the sunlight, and for a moment, he seemed lost in memory. Marcus's face darkened immediately. He strode toward Samuel with purpose, each step radiating barely contained rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus's voice cut through the afternoon air like a whip. Samuel looked up, startled from his reverie. His smile remained gentle. "I apologize, young man. I was just admiring your automobile. Beautiful machine. Reminds me of—" "I don't care what it reminds you of," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "Take your hands off my car. Do you have any idea how much this costs? Probably more than you've made in your entire life." Samuel slowly removed his hand, nodding with understanding. "You're absolutely right. I shouldn't have touched it without permission. I just nothing," Marcus snapped. "People like you need to learn to respect other people's property. This isn't some junkyard where you can put your grubby hands on whatever you want." A small crowd was beginning to gather. Hotel staff, arriving guests, people with their phones out. Samuel's expression shifted from apologetic to something harder to read, a mixture of sadness and something else. Recognition, perhaps, of a pattern he'd seen too many times before. "Son, I meant no disrespect," Samuel said, his voice calm but firm. "I was simply appreciating the craftsmanship. I've always had a deep respect for engineering excellence." Marcus's laugh was cold and bitter. "Engineering excellence? What would you know about that? Let me guess you wash cars for a living. Maybe you're hoping for a tip?" Samuel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "I'm a retired engineer, actually. I don't care if you're a retired astronaut." Marcus cut him off again, stepping closer. "You touched my property without permission. In my world, that has consequences." What happened next occurred so quickly that several witnesses would later give conflicting accounts. Marcus raised his hand and struck Samuel across the face. A sharp, stinging slap that echoed off the hotel's marble facade. The sound seemed to freeze time itself. Samuel staggered backward, his hand moving to his reddening cheek. The crowd gasped collectively. A woman screamed. The valet dropped his clipboard. But Samuel didn't fall. He stood there, straight back despite his years, his eyes locked on Marcus with an expression that transcended anger. It was profound disappointment. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Someone in the crowd murmured, but Marcus didn't hear. He was too busy feeling justified, righteous even, in his rage. Let that be a lesson, Marcus declared loudly, playing to the gathered audience. Keep your hands to yourself and stay in your lane. He turned on his heel and strode toward the hotel entrance, leaving Samuel standing alone in the sun. But here's what Marcus didn't notice in his self-satisfied departure. The hotel manager had recognized Samuel immediately. Her face had gone pale. She rushed to Samuel's side, her voice urgent and apologetic. "Mr. Hayes, I am so terribly sorry. Are you all right? Should I call someone? Your grandson, perhaps?" Samuel waved her off gently. "I'm fine, Patricia. Just a reminder that some lessons need to be learned the hard way. Sir, do you want to press charges? We have everything on camera." "That man assaulted you." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on his cheek. "No, not yet. But I think young Mr. Wellington and I will be having a conversation very soon. A conversation that's 40 years overdue." Inside the hotel's restaurant, Marcus sat down with his business partner, David Chun, who had witnessed the entire incident through the window. David's expression was troubled. "Marcus, what the hell was that?" David asked, keeping his voice low. "You just assaulted an elderly man in front of dozens of witnesses." Marcus waved dismissively, ordering a scotch from the hovering waiter. "The old guy had his hands on my car. He needed to learn some respect." "Respect? Marcus, you slapped a senior citizen for touching your car. Do you understand how insane that sounds?" "It's about principle, David. These people think they can do whatever they want, touch whatever they want. Someone needs to put them in their place." David leaned back, studying his partner with growing concern. "These people? Listen to yourself. That man was just looking at your car. He wasn't stealing it. He wasn't damaging it. He was admiring it. And you humiliated him." Marcus's phone buzzed. Then again, and again. He pulled it out and his face went from smug to confused. His social media was exploding. The incident had been filmed from multiple angles and was already going viral. The comments were brutal. "Arrogant millionaire slaps elderly veteran. Tech bro shows true colors. This is Marcus Wellington, CEO of Wellington Tech. Share this everywhere. That poor old man. Someone identify him so we can help." Marcus felt a flutter of unease, but he pushed it down. "It'll blow over," he muttered. "These things always do." David shook his head slowly. "I don't think this one will, Marcus. I really don't." By the time Marcus returned to his office 2 hours later, the situation had escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. His receptionist looked at him with barely disguised contempt. His employees whispered in clusters that fell silent when he passed. His phone was ringing off the hook: reporters, board members, angry customers. His assistant, Jennifer, a woman who'd worked for him for 3 years, was waiting in his office. She'd been crying. "Jennifer, hold all my calls. I need to. I quit," she said simply. Marcus stopped mid-stride. "What?" "I quit. Effective immediately. I can't work for someone who would do what you did today." Her voice shook but remained steady. "My grandfather is 76. If someone treated him the way you treated that man, I'd be devastated. I'm ashamed I ever worked for you." She walked out, leaving her access card on his desk. Marcus sank into his leather chair, finally allowing himself to feel the first tendrils of real fear. He pulled up the videos online. They've been viewed millions of times already. News outlets were picking up the story. His company's stock was dropping. Then he saw it, a comment that made his blood run cold. "That's Samuel Hayes. The Samuel Hayes. This idiot doesn't even know who he just slapped." Marcus frantically Googled the name. What he found made his world tilt on its axis. Samuel Hayes. born 1947 in Atlanta, Georgia. Graduated from MIT in 1969 with a degree in electrical engineering. One of only 3 black students in his class. Served in Korea. Returned to civilian life and spent 30 years at Bell Labs, where he developed fundamental algorithms for data, compression and transmission. Holder of 47 patents. His work in the 1980s created the foundation for modern internet data transfer protocols. The room spun. Marcus clicked through article after article, his hands trembling. Samuel Hayes had been a pioneer, a genius whose innovations had enabled the very technology that Marcus had built his empire upon. The algorithms Marcus's apps used, the data compression that made his services fast and efficient, all of it traced back to work Samuel Hayes had done decades ago. And Marcus had slapped him, called him ignorant, dismissed him as nobody. The phone rang. It was his board chairman, Gregory Walsh. Marcus, emergency board meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Be prepared to explain yourself. Gregory, I can explain. Can you explain why our stock is down 12%? Can you explain why 3 major clients have already cancelled contracts? Can you explain the PR nightmare you've created? Gregory's voice was ice. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Your job may depend on it. The line went dead. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt hollow. The sunset painted the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson, but he barely noticed. He'd spent hours reading about Samuel Hayes, and with each article, each interview, each patent filing, his shame grew heavier. Samuel Hayes had changed the world quietly, without fanfare, without credit. While other engineers became celebrities, Samuel had worked in the shadows, his contributions often attributed to others or simply absorbed into the collective advancement of technology. He'd faced discrimination, been passed over for promotions, watched younger white engineers take credit for his ideas. Yet he'd persisted, driven not by ego or money, but by a genuine love of innovation and problem-solving. And today, Marcus had treated him like garbage. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he opened it. Mr. Wellington, this is Samuel Hayes. I think we should talk. If you're willing, meet me tomorrow at the Grandeur Hotel lobby at 7 a.m. Come alone. Respectfully, Samuel Hayes. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Every instinct told him to get lawyers involved, to protect himself, to manage the situation. But something else, something he couldn't quite name, told him this was an opportunity he didn't deserve but desperately needed. He typed back, I'll be there. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the moment in his mind. The sound of the slap, the look in Samuel's eyes, his own words dripping with contempt. He'd always prided himself on being a self-made man, someone who earned everything through brilliance and hard work. But tonight, for the first time, he was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. He'd been standing on the shoulders of giants, and he'd never bothered to look down and see whose shoulders they were. At 6:30 a.m., Marcus arrived at the Grandeur Hotel. He wore jeans and a simple shirt. No power suit, no armor of wealth. He felt naked and young and terribly foolish. Samuel was already there, sitting in a leather chair in a quiet corner of the lobby, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He looked up as Marcus approached, his face unreadable. Thank you for coming, Samuel said simply, gesturing to the chair across from him. Please sit. Marcus sat, unable to meet the older man's eyes. Mr. Hayes, Samuel held up a hand. Before you speak, I want to tell you a story. Will you listen? Marcus nodded, his throat tight. In 1975, Samuel began, his voice quiet but clear, I was working at Bell Labs. I'd just developed an algorithm that would eventually become fundamental to data compression. I was 38 years old, and I thought I'd finally made it. I'd overcome the poverty of my childhood, the racism of my education, the skepticism of my colleagues. I was brilliant, and I knew it. He paused, taking a sip of coffee. One day I was in the parking lot, admiring a colleague's new Jaguar. Beautiful car. I wasn't touching it, just looking, but I was close. The owner came out a junior engineer, white, 25 years old. He'd been at the company 6 months. He looked at me and said, "You looking for spare change, buddy?" The janitor's entrance is around back. Marcus flinched. I told him I was an engineer. He laughed. Actually laughed. Called security. I had to show my badge to prove I worked there. The humiliation of that moment stayed with me for years. Samuel looked directly at Marcus now. "But do you know what I didn't do?" Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. "I didn't let it make me bitter. I didn't let it make me cruel. I didn't let it make me believe I was better than anyone else. Because the moment you start thinking you're superior to another human being based on wealth or skin color or anything else, that's the moment you lose your humanity." "Mr. Hayes," Marcus managed, his voice breaking, "I am so deeply sorry. What I did was unforgivable. You were right. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Not because of who you are, but because of what I did. To anyone, I have no excuse." Samuel studied him for a long moment. "Why did you do it, Marcus?" "And I want the truth." Marcus struggled to find words. "I was angry. I was stressed about a business deal. I saw someone I perceived as beneath me touching something I valued, and I lashed out. I felt entitled to. I felt powerful." He finally looked up. "I felt superior, and that feeling had been growing in me for years. The more money I made, the more I started to believe I was better than other people. That my success meant I was more valuable, more important. And now? Now I see how hollow that is. How poisonous." Marcus's hands were shaking. "I built my company on technology that exists because of your work. I stood on your shoulders and convinced myself I'd climbed there alone. And when I met you in person, I didn't see a pioneer or a hero, or even just a human being deserving of respect. I saw someone to dominate, someone to put down to make myself feel bigger." Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "I can't take it back. I can't undo it. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I've become, and I'm horrified." Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across and placed his weathered hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Thank you for that honesty," he said. "Now comes the hard part." "What's that?" "Becoming the person you should have been all along. Wealth isn't evil, Marcus. Success isn't wrong. But they reveal who you truly are. They're magnifiers. If you're kind, they make you kinder. If you're generous, they make you more generous. But if you're arrogant and cruel, they make you a monster." Samuel leaned forward. "You have a choice now. You can make this right. Not just with me, but with everyone your actions have hurt. Or you can go back to being who you were." "How do I make it right?" Marcus asked desperately. "Tell me how." Samuel smiled slightly. "That's something you have to figure out yourself. But I'll give you a hint. It starts with changing how you see people. Every person you meet, regardless of their station in life, has value, has a story, has dignity. Until you can see that nothing else changes." The board meeting that morning was brutal. Marcus sat at the head of the table, facing 8 people who looked at him with varying degrees of anger, disappointment, and contempt. "Marcus," Gregory began, "we've reviewed the situation. The financial impact has been severe. More importantly, you've damaged this company's reputation perhaps irreparably. We're here to discuss your removal as CEO." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand. But before you vote, I want to say something. He stood, his prepared speech forgotten. Instead, he spoke from somewhere raw and real. Yesterday, I assaulted an elderly man because he touched my car. I didn't know who he was when I did it, and that's been the narrative. Arrogant CEO didn't know he slapped a legend. But here's the truth. It shouldn't have mattered who he was. He could have been anyone, homeless, unemployed, whatever. And what I did would have been just as wrong. He looked around the table. I've spent years building walls between myself and other people. Walls made of money and success and ego. I convinced myself that I was special, that I was better, that I deserved more respect than other people. And yesterday, those walls led me to commit an act of violence against someone whose brilliance enabled everything I've built. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is my resignation as CEO, effective immediately. But it comes with a proposal. I want to establish the Samuel Hayes Foundation with a $50 million endowment from my personal wealth. Its mission will be to support Black engineers and scientists, to tell the stories of pioneers whose contributions were overlooked or forgotten, and to create opportunities for people who face the same barriers Samuel Hayes faced. The board members exchanged glances. Additionally, Marcus continued, I'm proposing that we bring Mr. Hayes on as a senior advisor and give him the recognition he deserves. Name on patents that built upon his work, equity in the company, and a formal apology from Wellington Tech for benefiting from his innovations without acknowledgement. Gregory leaned back, studying Marcus carefully. This is quite different from the man who walked in here. That man was a fool, Marcus said quietly. And it took Samuel Hayes showing me grace I don't deserve to help me see it. The board voted to accept Marcus's resignation, but appointed him to a new role, Chief Impact Officer, focused on corporate responsibility and the foundation. It was a demotion in title and power. But Marcus accepted it with something he hadn't felt in years: humility. 3 months later, Marcus stood on a stage at the National Technology Museum. But I'll give you a hint. It starts with changing how you see people. Every person you meet, regardless of their station in life, has value, has a story, has dignity. Until you can see that, really see that, nothing else changes. The board meeting that morning was brutal. Marcus sat at the head of the table, facing 8 people who looked at him with varying degrees of anger, disappointment, and contempt. Marcus, Gregory began, we've reviewed the situation. The financial impact has been severe. More importantly, you've damaged this company's reputation, perhaps irreparably. We're here to discuss your removal as CEO. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand. That before you vote, I want to say something. He stood, his prepared speech forgotten. Instead, he spoke from somewhere raw and real. Yesterday, I assaulted an elderly man because he touched my car. I didn't know who he was when I did it, and that's been the narrative. Arrogant CEO didn't know he slapped a legend. But here's the truth. It shouldn't have mattered who he was. He could have been anyone, homeless, unemployed, whatever. And what I did would have been just as wrong. He looked around the table. I've spent years building walls between myself and other people. Walls made of money and success and ego. I convinced myself that I was special, that I was better, that I deserved more respect than other people. And yesterday, those walls led me to commit an act of violence against someone whose brilliance enabled everything I've built. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is my resignation as CEO, effective immediately. But it comes with a proposal. I want to establish the Samuel Hayes Foundation with a $50 million endowment from my personal wealth. Its mission will be to support Black engineers and scientists, to tell the stories of pioneers whose contributions were overlooked or forgotten, and to create opportunities for people who face the same barriers Samuel Hayes faced. The board members exchanged glances. Additionally, Marcus continued, I'm proposing that we bring Mr. Hayes on as a senior advisor, and give him the recognition he deserves. Name on patents that built upon his work, equity in the company, and a formal apology from Wellington Tech for benefiting from his innovations without acknowledgement. Gregory leaned back, studying Marcus carefully. This is quite different from the man who walked in here. That man was a fool, Marcus said quietly. And it took Samuel Hayes showing me grace I don't deserve to help me see it. The board voted to accept Marcus's resignation, but appointed him to a new role, Chief Impact Officer, focused on corporate responsibility and the foundation. It was a demotion in title and power, but Marcus accepted it with something he hadn't felt in years: humility. 3 months later, Marcus stood on a stage at the National Technology Museum. The auditorium was packed with engineers, students, journalists, and tech industry leaders. But his attention was on the man sitting in the front row, Samuel Hayes, who smiled encouragingly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, "tonight we're here to honor a true pioneer of the digital age. But before we get to that, I need to tell you about the day I slapped Samuel Hayes." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't in the program. Marcus told the whole story, every ugly detail. He didn't spare himself or make excuses. He talked about his arrogance, his cruelty, his blindness. And then he talked about Samuel's response. "Samuel Hayes had every right to destroy me," Marcus said. "He had the evidence, the sympathy, the moral high ground. He could have sued me, ruined me, and no one would have blamed him. Instead, he taught me." He turned to where Samuel sat. "Mr. Hayes showed me that true greatness isn't about being the smartest person in the room, or the richest, or the most successful. It's about how you treat people when you have the power to harm them. It's about grace in the face of cruelty. It's about building others up instead of tearing them down." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Tonight, we're unveiling the Samuel Hayes Innovation Wing, permanently dedicated to telling the stories of engineers whose contributions shaped our world but who never received the recognition they deserved. We're launching the Hayes Fellowship, which will support 100 students annually. And we're doing something else. Marcus pressed a button, and behind him, a screen lit up with a document, a patent filing. This is the original patent for the data compression algorithm that made Wellington Tech possible. For years, it's been attributed to Bell Labs generically. Tonight, we're formally recognizing Samuel Hayes as the primary inventor, and we're establishing a licensing agreement that will pay him and his heirs royalties on every technology that uses his fundamental work. The audience erupted in applause. Samuel stood, tears in his eyes, and made his way to the stage. The two men embraced, the arrogant CEO and the humble genius, connected now by transformation and grace. A year later, Marcus sat in a community center in South Atlanta, helping a 16-year-old girl debug her code. Her name was Jasmine, and she was brilliant, the kind of raw talent that reminded Marcus of what Samuel must have been like at that age. "Mr. Wellington," she asked, looking up from her laptop, "is it true you used to be really mean?" Marcus laughed. "Yeah, Jasmine. I was awful. Arrogant, cruel, selfish. What changed?" Marcus thought about that day in the hotel parking lot, the sound of the slap, Samuel's face, the moment everything shifted. "I met someone who showed me that being powerful and being good aren't the same thing. And I realized I'd rather be good, even if it means being less powerful." "Especially then," Marcus said. "Real power isn't about dominating people or making them feel small. It's about lifting people up, building things that matter, creating opportunities for people who deserve them." Jasmine nodded thoughtfully and went back to her code. Marcus watched her work, marveling at her focus, her passion, her potential. This was what mattered. Not the Ferrari or the penthouse or the billions. This moment, this girl, this future he was helping to create. His phone buzzed. A text from Samuel. Dinner at my place tonight. My granddaughter wants to meet the infamous Marcus Wellington. Marcus smiled and typed back, I'll bring dessert. And I promise not to touch anything without permission. Samuel's response came immediately. You can touch anything you want, my friend. You've earned that trust. Marcus sat back, overwhelmed by emotion. A year ago, he thought respect was something you demanded, that superiority was something you demonstrated through dominance. Now he understood that respect was earned through character, and true superiority was recognizing there was no such thing, just human beings, each with their own dignity, their own worth, their own story. The slap that could have destroyed him had instead saved him, and the man he tried to diminish had lifted him up instead. 5 years after that day in the hotel parking lot, Marcus stood at a podium at MIT, delivering the commencement address. Samuel Hayes sat on the stage behind him, now 83, wearing an honorary doctorate robe. Graduates, Marcus told the sea of young faces, you're leaving here with brilliant minds and powerful tools. You'll have opportunities I couldn't have dreamed of. Some of you will become wealthy. Some will become famous. Some will change the world. He paused, looking back at Samuel. But here's what I want you to remember. None of that matters if you lose your humanity in the process. None of it matters if you use your power to diminish others instead of elevating them. None of it matters if you forget that every person you meet, regardless of their position or possessions, has inherent dignity and worth. He told them the story then. The whole story. He'd told it hundreds of times now, and each time it hurt less and taught more. That slap cost me everything I thought mattered, Marcus concluded. My reputation, my position, my pride. But it gave me something infinitely more valuable. The chance to become someone worth being. Don't wait for your wake-up call. Don't wait until you hurt someone to learn how to be kind. Start now. Start today. See people. Really see them. And treat everyone with the respect you hope to receive. The graduates rose in a standing ovation. But Marcus only cared about one person's response. He looked at Samuel, who stood slowly, clapping, tears streaming down his weathered face, and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Marcus mouthed back, thank you, because that was the truth. Samuel Hayes had taught him that the price of pride was everything that mattered, and the value of humility was everything that endured. The red Ferrari was long gone, sold, and the money donated. Marcus drove a modest sedan now. His penthouse had been replaced by a comfortable but unremarkable apartment. His wealth was largely flowing to the foundation and to programs that elevated others. And he'd never been happier, because he'd learned the hardest lesson life can teach. That our value as human beings isn't measured by what we own or what we achieve, but by how we treat others when we have the power to hurt them. That one moment of cruelty can define us forever, unless we have the courage to let it transform us instead. Marcus Wellington had slapped an old man and thought he'd asserted his dominance. Instead, he'd struck himself in the face with the truth. And Samuel Hayes, with grace and wisdom, had helped him find his way back to his humanity. That, in the end, was the real story. Not the slap, but what came after. Not the fall, but the long, difficult climb back up. Not the arrogance, but the humility earned through suffering and grace. And as Marcus looked out at those young faces, he thought, may you never need the lesson I needed. But if you do, may you find a Samuel Hayes to guide you home.